Hello there, and good to be with you once again. I'm Howard Bentham, and this is OxTalks, the podcast powered by OxLEP, the local enterprise partnership for Oxfordshire. OxTalks sets out to discuss current issues in business and explore areas of interest in conversation with some of Oxfordshire's most remarkable leaders. Each and every one of my guests is keen to flag up the invaluable support that OxLEP offers and how it could be crucial in helping your company or organisation develop and thrive. Although we focus on Oxfordshire's businesses in these podcasts, we know many of you listen to us in various parts of the UK and indeed different parts of the globe. Most of the issues we experience here will be very similar to the ones that you're potentially facing where you are. So please join in the conversation and share any thoughts and feedback. Our social media is the obvious way to get in touch. We are at Oxfordshire LEP on X and Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership on LinkedIn. You can raise a question for future discussions or leave your thoughts on the topics of conversation. Please use the email address on the podcast description, and we look forward to hearing from you. In this edition, we'll offer something of a guide to keeping up with changing times, particularly focusing on independent businesses. How can independent organisations and their employees adapt to the ever-changing business landscape to compete with larger companies and achieve growth and success? We've spoken in previous OxTalks episodes about the importance of SMEs to the economy both nationally and locally. Put simply, they are the engine room of UK PLC. SMEs account for over 99% of the business population in the UK, with a similar percentage here in Oxfordshire as a whole. They employ 16.7 million people nationally, and in 2023 had a turnover of £2.4 trillion, which is just over half of the UK's total, according to government figures. One of the interesting subplots, however, certainly with today's OxTalks guest, is how he balances age-old tradition with driving a small to medium-sized family business forward. The 175-year-old Hook Norton Brewery in Oxfordshire, incredibly, is still powered by steam and uses dray horses to make its deliveries, yet it survives in the digital age with thriving online sales and a growing customer base. Let's find out how they achieve that balancing act. I'm delighted to welcome to OxTalks the MD of Hook Norton Brewery, James Clarke. James, welcome. It's a fascinating world that you inhabit. Before we talk about steam engines, dray horses and beer, can we find out a little bit more about you and your background? You've been managing director of Hook Norton for 2 decades, at the business, for 33 years now. You're the great-grandson of the founder. Was it always nailed on that you were going to be the boss of the brewery one day?
No, absolutely not. And I think it certainly wasn't nailed on from a family and immediate business point of view. I think probably sometimes people slightly removed just make the assumption that you're going to take over. But I think there's 2 strings to it, really. One is obviously it's a fantastic opportunity and one that I'm extremely lucky to have been offered and have taken up. But the other one is, if you don't feel it's for you, I think you've absolutely got to be open and say that, because there's lots of jobs that depend on that leadership, that person that's going to run the business. As you've mentioned, there's lots of history, so you have to sort of maintain that as well. So it was never pressure from family or from the immediate business. It was always, there is something here, but I'm lucky enough and decided that I would take the opportunity I was presented with.
But you were a firefighter at one stage. Was this a firefighter before you worked at the brewery or during, or what was it?
No, this was alongside. I actually started full-time at Hook Norton on the 1st of April 1991 and started as what was then a retained firefighter. I think it may have even been a retained fireman then. Now obviously an on-call firefighter. I joined up on the 1st of May 1991.
Right, okay, so it was your thing, you just sort of ran on the side, if you like.
Very much, and we had several retained firefighters from the brewery, and including my father. Actually, my grandfather had been before that.
Right. I was just wondering, looking at your background, whether it was the bit of rebellion to not follow the family line, but clearly not.
No, I think the two run very much in parallel. And as people probably know, on-call firefighters need to be drawn from their immediate community. And it was something that we were able to support and did for a long time.
Now, as you say, you came to work at Hook Norton in 91. Your father sadly died in 2004. I'd imagine that the onus was on you then to step into his role, aside from the personal sadness you were feeling about your father? Was that a difficult decision to make?
Well, when I started the business, I came through on the production side. So I established a laboratory, and I was very much on the brewing, the manufacturing side, more so than the general business side to start with, and then took over in charge of the brewing operations, I think in the late 1990s. And then father decided that he would slow down his commitment a bit and do more of the sort of PR type things, as kiss the babies, as we say, and I would take on more sort of operational side of it. Sadly, we did the handover in January 2004, but then he passed away in September 2004, so we didn't really have the handover or transition that we were hoping to.
So not a difficult decision to make that leap then for you. It was, by then, I guess it was really becoming an obvious thing to do.
Yes, I think that the plan was already there. It's just it sort of happened much sooner than we thought.
We've talked about leadership in previous editions of OxTalks. How have your previous career and life experiences shaped you as a person and made you into the kind of MD that you are today?
I think I'm very lucky to have been able to combine the work at the brewery and the work in the fire service, because work at brewery, family business, long history and tradition, that needs to be maintained, as well as obviously keeping the business commercial and ultimately protecting jobs. And certainly job protection was our key all through the COVID period. But then doing the firefighting on the side, very different, local authority based, run by the county council, so very different structure. And I think that, and with an element of discipline, as is sort of necessary in that role. So I was lucky I was able to merge the two together. I think I'm probably a bit too laid back and my leadership can be too collaborative sometimes. But certainly I was lucky to have the two elements shaping that.
That is really fascinating to explore, because something like firefighting is a real team effort, but it needs outstanding individuals. So that's something that I guess in business is something you would need to try and sort of focus on as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly from my experience in the fire services, often, short periods of fairly intense activity where you were very, very reliant on your team. Life and death sounds a bit dramatic, but sometimes you were committing yourself into hostile environments, and you need to be absolutely sure. Training was the old thing of, train hard, fight easy, absolutely. And obviously in a commercial business, you've generally got longer periods of time to plan what you want to do on a sort of short, mid and longer term basis. But so I think it's very similar. Planning needs to go in, training and so on. But I certainly feel there was a huge benefit from having two quite different things that I was doing.
Let's talk about business growth and balancing that with maintaining traditional ways of doing things. And there aren't many more traditional businesses than yours. It says 175 years old this year. What do you think have been the major changes during your time in the business, and perhaps the changes that you're most proud of?
I think the majority of the change we've seen has been driven by changing consumer patterns. And if I sort of put it very simply, I've been at the brewery just over 30 years. When I started, I think we just got 4 channels on the television, just gone up from 3 to 4. Obviously, the mobile phone and the internet were years away, and the pub was very much a part of social fabric in all communities. You socialised there, you partied there. If you wanted a plumber or an electrician, you found out where they drank on a Sunday and you went and saw them in the pub and told them you had a job for them. That's all gone now. And also consumption has changed. Back then we still had some sort of heavy industry. There's still quite a lot of beer sold in club environments as well as pubs. But it has hugely changed since then. I think attitudes to alcohol have changed too. There's a much stronger health lobby. Something like 23% of, I think, 20 to 25-year-olds do not drink alcohol. So huge change is driven by changing consumer patterns, really. And we need to make sure that we can adapt to that, because we're very lucky with all the history. I've got records going back to the beginning. I can look back. We can recreate old beers. We have the horses, the steam engine, the lovely old building. But they still have to work in a modern world, and they still have to have appeal. And you still need to make sure that you keep your relevance.
Give us a tangible example of that then, a decision that you've made that factors in all those changes over those 30 years, one that stands out for you perhaps.
I think the big thing is probably was the COVID period. Obviously, I think was the hardest challenge the company in that about 170 years as it was then, 2 world wars, pubs were never shut, pubs were kept open, so there was some respite for the people who were remaining at home. The beer consumption has gone down, as I said, due to these changing lifestyles, consumer patterns. So don't try and push water uphill. Focus on what you can do. So we've actually reduced the amount of beer that we make, but we've looked at exploring different markets, having shorter routes to market. So we like to sell beer directly to pubs who sell it to customers, and we like to sell beer directly to customers. We don't sell much beer to wholesalers, and that was one of the fundamental changes. So we could reduce the volume, increase the profitability a bit, increase the margin. And for an old building that takes quite a lot of maintenance, we can't produce high volumes, cheaply, if you like. So that was a big thing, and people understand what we did. It was quite hard articulating why we reduced. We're probably brewing half the volume we were 30 years ago. But then beer consumption in the UK 30 years ago was about double what it currently is. And of that figure, 90% was drunk in pubs, 10% drunk at home. Now, slightly more beer is drunk at home than in pubs or clubs, from a total that's much lower. So in effect, that drinking in pubs, clubs, in what we call the on-trade, has dropped significantly. But I think we sort of took the view, acknowledge that you're not going to change these patterns and just try and deal with it.
The keeping up with evolving business landscape, you've clearly got your finger on the pulse. You know what's happening out there, to use a phrase. But how have you balanced the tradition with, for example, you've got great online sales, but you've got a steam-powered factory, which I just think is just amazing. And you have horses. Why not have vans? Why not have a modern...
We do have vans and electric motors and things as well. Yeah, it's not all steam and horses. It's all part of it. There's a well-known beer writer who says you have to live with the past, not in it. And again, that sounds quite simple, really, but that's been one of the mantras that I've tried to work with. The best way to preserve a lot of the old machinery and fabric is to keep using it rather than just museum it, but make changes where you need to make them. So the horses are unashamedly a part of our marketing. They're a net cost to the business, obviously. There's just over 2 full-time employees, and there's 3 horses and everything that goes with it. But there are less breeding Shire horse mares than breeding pandas. So we're quite involved in the breed, not just Shire horse at Hook Norton.
That's an amazing stat or anecdote. Wow, incredible.
And I've been involved with the Shire Horse Society, and we still are, and we want to support that. And if you're going to support the breed, you have to keep using them. So again, you can't put the horse in the museum. You need to keep using these things.
So you make less beer now, and tastes have changed, as you've said. I mean, just looking at some stats I've got here, only 30% of 18 to 24-year-olds drink beer. Low and no alcohol drinks very much in fashion. And an older audience, I would surmise, would physically drink less, and it's a bit more quality over quantity in some respects there. Have your products evolved with that changing taste?
Hugely, yeah. So again, in my sort of 3 decades there, when I started, we brewed 3 beers. We brewed a mild, a bitter, and Old Hooky, and that was it. Now we brew over the course of a year, literally dozens, because we have a small sort of test plant that we use as well. But we've brought some old recipes out, and we developed some new beers. So one of the more recent ones was a gluten-free pale ale, because that's if you have a member of your group that wants to seek out a gluten-free beer, they'll be the decision maker. So they'll want to go to the place with a good gluten-free offering. So we developed that, which I'm really pleased with. We're brewing lager now. So we never actually kegged our beers in the 60s and 70s when the keg beer, the beer in the barrel that was ready to drink rather than being a live beer, came around. We do now. We have a lager, which is about 10% of our sales. And I often people say, what would your father and grandfather think? And I think they'd be positive. They say, lager, what are you doing brewing lager? But there was a demand for it, and it's a locally produced beer using our own well water. And it's an opportunity to say it's growing.
And the no alcohol thing? Have you picked
We're
up on
looking at low and no. We've done some trials with some sort of 2% beers. We are looking at doing a low, so below 0.5%, but that's work in progress, which the team have been tasked with.
And what about competing with the larger online retailers? Because you are online now, and obviously competition is very, very tough. Are things such as packaging and price difficult to get correct, and then still keep what you're offering profitable for the business?
Yeah, online sales of beer are quite difficult because beer generally is lower value. So if someone's buying a bottle of malt whiskey that's 40, 50, 60 pounds and probably weighs a kilogram and can be packaged nicely, a case of beer, 30 pounds, let's say, and weighs 10 kilograms. So you have the challenge there with that. But the beauty really of the internet and online is that it really leveled the playing field, as does social media in terms of communications. Small companies can have a big reach and quite a lot of noise from far lower cost than they would have been more traditionally.
And I guess there's also the fact that you are online. You're a local brand, a very strong local brand, obviously, but national too and international, and that just raises that profile, I guess.
It does, yes, yeah. And whilst some will say, well, don't you want people to drink beer in pubs? Yes, we do. But then there are people who drink beer at home for the stats I've mentioned. We need to make sure we can satisfy both. And again, we had a fairly good online business pre-COVID. And then, like so many, it went extremely busy over the COVID period. But it did test us. And we broadened the product range then, because I thought if people are drinking at home, I'd like to always have 12 different bottle beers. So there's some variety, some choice. And that pushed us to develop a few new products and really develop the online platform.
I mean, for me, where I think you've been super savvy is the fact that it's not just beer, is it? There is an experience to this too. You have experience tours. There's a hospitality offering. You've really embraced diversification. That jumps off the page at me.
Yes, and that's we've been doing brewery tours for a long time, and we've noticed over the years. Certainly there's a lot more interest in provenance, where your food and drink comes from, food miles, sustainability, carbon footprints and so on. We're lucky with the old traditional buildings we've got, which we are still using, although we've modernised some of the work inside, but becoming more and more a tourist type destination. And we have lots of buildings on site which only really, they're historically buildings where sacks of grain were stored.
Yeah.
So they're quite low ceilinged, and you're a bit limited what you can do with them apart from put people in them. So we've developed various different facilities, like restaurant, function room, wedding venue, and so on, because people like to come, whether it's just for a beer, whether it's for a tour, whether they want an event there. And that's an area that we've really seen grown. I think we've been lucky in Oxfordshire with things like Soho Farmhouse and Dalesford on the Fringe, which has probably moved the Cotswolds east towards London, and we do obviously rely on a lot of tourists coming from the London area with decent rail links. Now it is an hour to Oxfordshire, and there's a lot to offer, and we're certainly seeing that side of the business grow, and that there'll be investment focused on that part as well.
How many people have you got working for you now?
I think there's about 120, of which probably 2/3 are now in what I call a sort of retail type role. So in terms of manufacturing and distribution, that's the lower part.
And going back your 33 years, what would that compare to?
There would have been nobody in retail and probably 50 people in the brewery.
That's incredible, isn't it? You've touched on the sort of geographical thing there. You are, with all respect to Hook Norton, pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It's a lovely spot. Is that a help or a hindrance, being plonked in the middle of the countryside like that?
I think if you looked purely commercially, you'd probably say a challenge. But then I look and I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And when I started, we were the small brewer in Oxfordshire. You had Breakspear down in Henley-on-Thames, you had Moorland in Abingdon, and you had Morrells in Oxford, all in quite high value town city centre sites. And unfortunately, I think that was part of their challenge, but the site value. We're in basically surrounded by fields in a rural environment, and we're not squeezed by property prices. And I think that's been a big saviour. So definitely it's a long-term benefit.
And what are the real challenges then you face having a base sort of away from the centres of population? The horses can only go so far.
Horses only go so far, yeah. But our distribution fleet has reduced in size, so we tend not to run big trucks anymore. We're generally running smaller vehicles, and that's also a function of the fact that beer drinking in pubs has reduced. So, if you're going to a pub and delivering 20 draft beer containers, it's fine. You go on a lorry, but more and more now you're delivering 2 or 3, and it's far more efficient to just use a van and sort of darting around the countryside than big trucks. And that suits us with the area that we're in, and narrow roads and so on. But yeah, I think our location absolutely is a positive.
Let's bring in OxLEP's communication manager, Rob Panting, into the conversation. Talking about the rural location here, this must be an issue that OxLEP hears pretty often. There's an awful lot of green space in Oxfordshire, which isn't always conducive to efficiently running a business.
Yes, we do hear that quite often, particularly from a small business perspective, where as has been touched on a little bit with James earlier on, I think often for businesses, the bottom line cost aspect is the main decision maker. So that comes into play a lot. I think more widely, particularly for small businesses, one of the big issues in a rural setting is the access to good quality broadband. We heard from James earlier on about online sales, and actually how effective that is, particularly for some industries. It makes a huge difference. So having access to good quality, high speed broadband in a rural setting is something that probably has appeared more of an issue over recent years, whereas access to space perhaps has fallen down the priority list a little bit for small businesses. We've done quite a bit of work as a local enterprise partnership to try and secure funding to create better broadband connections within the county. So the rural gigabit scheme that we've supported, rural gigabit voucher scheme that we've supported, that's brought in around about £1 million into the county in recent years, and that's helped to connect or establish 400 new ultra-fast broadband connections into the county. So those little bits, I think, really do help to ensure that the rural economy of Oxfordshire continues to be a good one. But certainly, I think any rural business will find that there's always challenges. But hopefully those sort of new additions has really helped our rural business community.
Does Oxfordshire, and indeed many other parts of the UK, sometimes forget that rural business is absolutely fundamental to successful and vibrant local economies?
Yeah, totally. And I think organisations like ours, we need to remember that. It's very easy for us to talk about the science and innovation qualities in Oxfordshire, and obviously they're a massive part of our economy, the research and development that happens in Oxfordshire and the brilliant business and science parks that we have here. But we mustn't forget that this might be a slightly dated stat, but I think 80% of the county is in effect agricultural land or looked after by businesses with that focus. So we can't forget that, and we need to support our rural community and rural businesses as best we can.
And I guess even just thinking about your firefighting side of things, James, that local aspect is crucial to what you do.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And just on the sort of access to internet and broadband and so on, it's transformed what we can do. And lots of local businesses around us are in rural locations, and one of them is an engineering business, so lots of stuff going up to the cloud, but these high-speed connections are absolutely key. And I liken it, people think I'm crazy, but I liken it to when the railway came in the 1880s. When the railway came to Hook Norton, you could actually go somewhere and talk to somebody. Before that, you're on a horse, and that's very much what the internet has brought. And if you can get good strengths, it will definitely drive these businesses in these nice rural locations.
Yeah, and that James was really keen to stress the positives of being in the sticks, Rob, and it's internet is one thing, but communicate the other side of it, the physical communication, the roads and the infrastructure is so crucial.
Hugely important, and actually the point that you made, James, around the visitor economy in Oxfordshire and how that I like the description around how the Cotswolds has moved further east in recent years. I think that's a really good analogy to make, and the importance for us as a county to invest in supporting our rural economy that might traditionally not have looked at the visitor economy as something that they could tap into. I think the most recent figures that were released a couple of years ago, the visitor economy in Oxford has picked up again to be over £2 billion per year, the value of it. So there's a significant opportunity for rural businesses to really tap into that, and also, you think about our market towns and how they can benefit from getting good footfall into those areas, the likes of Burford and Woodstock and these rural towns where they truly benefit from not just national footfall but international footfall as well. And it's great to hear that Hook Norton Brewery has hugely benefited from that aspect too.
James and Rob, thank you both for the moment. We'll chat again shortly. You're listening to OxTalks, the podcast powered by the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Please get in touch with the team at OxLEP to comment on what you've been hearing. Find us on social media. We are on X at Oxfordshire LEP, or via LinkedIn, search for Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. Perhaps you run a company or organisation that's looking for some specific help, or simply need a steer to the most appropriate business advice available. Why not try the OxLEP Business Support Tool?
OxLEP's Business Support Tool is here to help your company. Whether you're just starting out, growing, or ready to take on a new business challenge. If you're looking for the latest advice and support, complete our Business Support Tool today and get set to receive a bespoke action plan for your organisation. Head to oxlepbusiness.co.uk to find out more.
Let's chat more to James Clarke, MD of Hook Norton Brewery. Before we delve into other areas, James, I've just got to ask you about the fire you had at the brewery back in May this year. How are things now? And did you get to the bottom of what caused it? It was in the stable block, wasn't it?
It was. It appears it was in the roof of the stable block. So the ground floor is the stables and some storage, and the first floor is some office space that we let out to another local business and 2 staff flats. It appears it started in the first floor, possibly in the roof. The investigations are ongoing. We've had quite detailed forensic investigations going on. But yeah, significant roof fire. Local fire service on scene within 7 minutes. It happened during the day. I think it was about 12:30 in the day. They're on scene, and then obviously lots more resources came in. A lot of damage. Unfortunately, the people that rent the offices lost everything. But just going back, we've talked about broadband and so on. On the Tuesday morning after the fire on the Monday, they were back up and running without any business interruption. So even the old days of your server where you did your backup at the end of the day, you would still lose a day's work. They didn't lose anything, and literally the delay was just getting hold of new hardware. So more laptops and things. So I thought that was impressive. Nobody was hurt. All the evacuation plans.
The horses were in the field, weren't they?
Horses were in the field anyway, because it's a Monday, their day off.
Yeah. That's their day off. Sorry,
the day off.
Monday's their day off.
Yes, yeah. So they're out. Everybody evacuated properly, and the team at the brewery did what they could. We got underground water sources we used for brewing. So it's a fairly high quality water used by the fire service to extinguish the fire, and we had them from all over the county. And the point for me is nobody was hurt. Evacuation plans work. So some of those things can seem a bit boring with a business, but they are essential. And that they worked. And we had 100 firefighters over a 24-hour period, and we didn't have one accident book entry, which I thought was impressive too. Because you would expect with a fire of that nature, with 10 fire engines at the height of the blaze, there might be something, but no, it was all dealt with safely.
Were you sitting there with your little peak cap and a checklist as a former firefighter?
Well, I was in their control unit with a set of brewery plans, sort of saying, this is the wall where I think we need to try and stop the fire, trying not to be an armchair firefighter. And then we're Google Earthing and showing where the water supplies are. And then we made going back to the rural location, Brewery Lane is quite narrow, so we established an alternative access across some farmers' fields. And again, using Google Earth in their control unit, liaising with the police was... I noticed, I've been out of the fire service 20 years, but I noticed a huge improvement in the organisation, the general management of the incident. I think that the fact nobody was hurt probably sits in with that sort of culture that's there. as well.
The horse is going to get a nice shiny new stable block now.
Yes, we're on it now. So now the work starts to rebuild.
Yeah.
So we'll hopefully get the building completely scaffolded, shrouded, and then rebuild it. We'll have some temporary stables, but again, the big thing is that nobody was hurt.
Let's look at sales. Who's your main target audience? I'm intrigued.
Our main target audience is the person that goes to the pub to drink beer. But we have to be very careful we don't get too focused or be too exclusive on that. That's ideally where we'd like to, or indeed come to the brewery and have a glass of beer sat in one of the bars of the brewery. But, demographic, it's completely broad. We want to appeal to everybody. But the key focus is the pub, but then say there's lots of distance selling with the online business. There's the brewery shop where people come and buy face to face. And then there's some growing export markets.
Right. So there's not a person you have in mind that drinks and buys your beer then. It's a broad church now.
It's a broad church. In terms of the person, it's probably someone that has some interest in their provenance and their food and drink. It's probably somebody who likes other alcoholic drinks, not just beer. They have an interest in that because we like to think we're a bit artisan. We're not global brands that are just pushed from a marketing side. It's probably somebody that's quite aware of what they're eating. And it's somebody that understands that moderate beer consumption can be part of a healthy diet.
How do you attract and retain new customers?
I think in terms of the person that goes in the pub, I say we're not selling beer. We're selling an experience. And for me, when I go to the pub, the beer is a part of that experience. The other bits are who I'm with, because hopefully I've picked a nice company. The environment you're in, whether it's sat by the log fire, in a beer garden, by a river, whatever it may be, and the hospitality and the service, because that if you're buying not just a beer but an alcoholic drink or any drink in the pub environment, you will be paying a lot more than you would if you went to a supermarket or a grocery chain. But a large element of that cost is for the service, the hospitality that you're enjoying. So for me, it's not just about, and I think if it ever became just about the product, we're getting something wrong. We need to make sure we're selling an experience, we're selling fun.
Is size important? Do you think your unique position as a smaller, family-owned brewery is attractive to customers? You talk about the provenance thing.
Yeah, I think it's attractive. You got to make sure you're not perceived as stuffy or old-fashioned. So you've got your drinkers who will drink one of your longer established brands, and that's what they want to drink. They're not sort of promiscuous drinkers. They like that. And so you've got to absolutely work on the quality of that. And I'm always telling the brewing team it's our best bitter and our old hooky that pay the bills. They're the two main beers. But let's have a play and develop and create some new recipes, which they have done. Let's look at what we want to do with that. Let's push the boundaries a bit. But let's make sure if you can get a 3.5% bitter cask condition, so a real ale, serve the customer in really good condition, then that arms you quite well to do lots of other things. Because the lower strength beers are arguably harder to brew because you've got less flavour there, less alcohol. And alcohol is a major part of the flavour balance. So let's get the bread and butter right. Let's get that right. Make sure the quality's there. So the person that almost subliminally buys that beer, they go to the pub on a Friday to meet their mates. They go on a Thursday to play Aunt Sally. And they're going to drink, I won't quantify, but they're going to drink a few beers. And they just want a nice drink that they can enjoy that's the right price and so on. So we've got to get that right for those people. But then we've got to do a bit of work on new product development, exploration, trying different things, which we have done. We have this small, say, pilot brewery that's 10% of the size of our main brewery's smallest scale.
On site?
On site, yeah. So I've even brewed a couple of beers this year. All of them, the brewing team are quite young and quite sort of hoppy pale beer focus, so I just throw a ring and say I want to brew a brown beer. So I brewed a
Because you're
mile.
the official old duffer, are you?
Oh, yeah. I brewed a mile for my 33 years of the brewery, just for the fun of it. But that enables us to do some NPD, a bit of fun. And in fact, we host weddings, and some people that have a wedding there will come and brew their own beer for the wedding.
What a great
so
idea.
we've got some people in there today, I think. They will come up with them. Well, I'd like a beer, this sort of strength, this sort of colour, this sort of flavour, and we'll look at the raw materials available. We'll taste some of our existing beers and say which characters from that beer would you like in your beer, and then they can have their beer at their wedding. And it's a great way. It's very personal. We might hand bottle some with their own label on, so there's a nice wedding favour. And it's really good when you've got a long wedding rather than maybe giving them expensive fizzy wine all afternoon, and it has a fairly rapid physiological effect, whereas a couple of pints of a mid-strength beer, everyone's going to enjoy the day a lot more.
Yeah. That's a really, really good idea. I'm intrigued about your chain of pubs, because it's quite a number across quite an expanse of counties, isn't it, really? And just sort of help us understand how they support the local economy.
So we have just over 30 pubs, and they are spread around sort of North Oxfordshire and then into South Northants, Warwickshire, Gloucestershire, and I think into Worcestershire.
And they're all owned. That's
all,
quite an
all
empire.
the freehold properties are owned by us. A small number of those pubs are directly managed by us, so we employ the staff that work in them, but by far the majority are let out on a tenanted business agreement. So the people in there rent the property from us. They have a supply deal with us to buy their draft beer, but in terms of what they do for food and wine and how they run the business, that's entirely up to them. So it does create some difference, some individuality, which can work very well. And we've got some pubs that I'm really pleased with how they're going. It's tough. They've seen the rising costs as much as any business. And you've seen, not just input costs in terms of food and utilities, also staff costs. Because hospitality was quite affected during COVID, a lot of certainly kitchen teams retrained. So there's a bit of a shortage, and salaries and salary expectation is significantly higher than it was 4 or 5 years ago.
So it's tough times in the pub industry, James. We'll talk about that in a sec. But sports clubs too, because Rob, I believe your cricket club, Shipton under Wychwood, is a hooky
Customer.
A hooky customer, yeah.
Yep.
And you're a fully paid up member of the hooky customer club by the sounds of it.
I've enjoyed the introduction of the hooky cider, which I know is I think created off site.
Yes.
But equally, I know, I think we've been a customer now for 4 or 5 years. We changed during COVID, in fact. And yes, a lot of the club members, the type of persona, I suppose, that you're describing in terms of the drinkers that we have, they enjoy the quality of the drink. And I think actually that's probably been demonstrated in the money that's found its way into the club, and obviously in turn to the brewery as well. So yeah, the Cricket Club's a fully paid up member of Hook Norton Brewery.
And I was sort of joking about that, but there is that ripple effect locally on something like a cricket club that will have a huge effect on that area, and obviously that's all comes back to you.
Yeah, and it's all about, obviously we want to sell our products, but we very much want the local franchise, and it's not just like when I go to the pub, it's not just for the beer. Pubs aren't just selling beer, they're selling an experience. When we sell beer to customers, pubs, sports clubs, we should be selling that as well. We have regular delivery staff that have their regular runs. They get to know the outlet. So is it a cellar underground? Is it in a shed? Do I have to get a key? Do I have to be here between this time? Am I not to get there too early? All these sorts of things. And we can do that and be flexible. Because we have the shop on site, we offer trade collections of beer 7 days a week. So if you have a busy, Friday night, you can come to the brewery Saturday and pick up some more beer. We find it's quite competitive out there because consumption is under pressure, and we'll sometimes find we'll be undercut by another company and we might lose a customer. But quite often, 2 or 3 months later, they're coming back and saying, actually, the fact that you delivered regularly, the fact that you were flexible, the fact that we could pick up beer at the weekend, the fact that you provided a few prizes for a raffle, this sort of thing, come back. So it's a case of selling that whole experience again to the customer.
The pub trade, though, is having a tough time. Is the pub industry dying?
The pub industry is under a lot of pressure, and it's mainly due to changing lifestyles, as we said earlier. And I think we need to not lament too much the fact that a lot of pubs have closed. It's sad, but if they were commercially viable, they wouldn't close. And when you drive around a sort of urban or suburban environment and you see, a supermarket chain, one of their sort of smaller on a corner, then there used to be a pub, then that was a pub retailing liquor. It's now a shop retailing, amongst other things, liquor. It's still a retail outlet, and it's still probably employing, I don't know, half a dozen, maybe a dozen people. So we need to be mindful of that, because we can't just have pubs that are empty. Lunchtime drinking now is all but disappeared. So we have to just be mindful of that. We've lost about 10,000 pubs, I think, over the last 10 years in this country, but consumption has followed that pattern as well. And you never see in the press about a pub that opens or reopens. Maybe you just don't see that because it's good news, which is often not seen as news. So pubs are under a huge amount of pressure from changing consumer habits and from the cost base. But there are still some amazing pubs out there, and you have to get that experience right. There are lots of pubs now reducing their food offer because they, looking at the balance of the cost of the kitchen team versus that, and actually people sometimes are quite happy to go to a pub with a limit, or indeed even no food offer. Certainly in a city, you would find that lots of pubs can survive on liquor only, but in the rural pubs, people are adapting. Pop-up foods become quite a thing because you've got no overhead when it comes, and it keeps people there. So people are being innovative, and this is where, if you have an owner or operator business, which you do with a tenanted model, hopefully they can put their flair on it and just be a bit different. But people don't just default to the pub now. They've got so many other leisure things at their fingertips. So the pub has got to be, and the pub is competing with home entertainment. So I remember when it went from 3 to 4 TV channels now, and you look now, you scroll along Prime, Netflix, and iPlayer, whatever else it is, and you've literally got access to thousands and thousands of hours of entertainment. So we're up against that sort of competition. We've seen a lot more festivals over the last probably 10, 15 years. They're under pressure a bit this year because of the costs of infrastructure. But people, if they're going to festival for a weekend, they spend several £100s. But, pub visits would suffer as a result of that. So we're seeing pubs do a bit more with music. I'm a big believer in live music in pubs. And I think that's something that's having a little bit of a renaissance. So yeah, it's hard for them. I think there will be a few more pubs go countrywide, but hopefully what's left will be better. But if you wound the clock back, a few decades rather than just the last two, you'd see that pattern anyway. In Hook Norton, there's, I remember the Bell Inn that closed probably 10 years ago. And then there were a couple of other pubs that closed sort of 30, 40 years ago. Life moves on, and we need to not forget that. As we said, with all this tradition and history, hang on to it where we can, but we want to make sure. So what we don't want in this country is 60,000 pubs that are all lackluster. There'll probably be 45,000 pubs, but hopefully they'll be better.
Thriving businesses, hopefully, yeah. I mean, like many small breweries, the aim of late is just survival. Are you feeling more optimistic about the future?
Yeah, I mean, we are in a more fortunate position where we have very little bank borrowings because we own our freehold property estate. And, that's been significant help and comfort to us as we invest. We tend to, most of our long investments are taken with very much a long-term view. But yes, we're optimistic. We're moving quite fast. We're investing in greener energy. The brewing process is quite energy intensive. So we've worked with parts of the enterprise partnership looking at our usage and looking at our data. So we'll be investing in some new energy raising kit, some green energy in terms of solar as well. Our aim is to go to 50% solar within probably a year, but also looking at pubs where there's an opportunity to do that as well. You've got the complexity there of lots of the pubs are listed buildings or conservation areas, so that will be a longer burn, but we thought we could get the brewery on that side, and then investing more in the retail experience, so the visitor experience.
Just at the moment, so what's the sort of percentage-wise in terms of bulk of your business? Is it in the pubs? Is it online sales? Is it the spin-offs like the visitor centre? How does it break down?
At the moment, about 2/3 would be into pubs, clubs of some nature, and the bulk of the rest would be a little bit of wholesale, a little bit of export, and then the rest would be direct to consumer. But we see that growing. I think that will grow to at least probably go to half in the next 10 years, I think.
Interesting. It's a family business, and obviously you're the boss, and you're the great grandson, and the history is there. Do you invite engagement from employees with or people outside the family with different ideas, or maybe business organisations to offer some help, or we've always done it this way, we're going to keep it like this?
No, I try and be absolutely the opposite. We've always done it this way, but that doesn't mean it's the right way. I've been doing this for 30 years. Well, you've been doing it wrong for 30 years is sometimes my response. I think we're very lucky because we're in a very sociable industry. So we have regular meetings of sort of the finance and IT people from probably 20 companies of our sort of. They'll meet up annually, production groups. I was on a barley walk on Tuesday with some barley growers in Norfolk, and there were, I think, half a dozen other brewers there. So as well as looking at the barley and talking to the farm, you obviously talk about wider issues. But no, absolutely always taking on advice and always trying to encourage staff to have ideas and say, accept the fact that 9 out of 10 of your ideas will not go anywhere, because they won't, but don't stop having ideas, because that 1 in 10, could be massive. But don't be put off by the fact, let's have these ideas and let's talk. I'm always discussing best practice across, we're very, we mentioned earlier, we suffered the fire in May, and I had, not dozens, but lots and lots of offers of help. Do you need this? And it was genuine help. It wasn't people trying to take advantage. It was, what can we help with? We were lucky because it didn't really affect our operations, but that's the nature of the brewing industry.
Rob, OxLEP's main market, if you like, when it comes to providing business support, tends to be businesses that have just started out, perhaps, or those in the very early stages of growth. How often do you support the more established businesses that have been around for 100 plus years?
Yeah, more often than you would think. So we did an impact report at the end of 2023, and that looked at sort of the past 6 or 7 years, the type of businesses that we've supported, and around about 10% of those are growing businesses, which would sort of classify as 10% annual growth, and 5% are scale-up businesses, which represent 20% growth per year. So it's a decent proportion of our client base are your more established businesses. I think from our perspective, it's important that we remain aware of the challenges that face those sort of more established businesses, and as we touched on earlier, the rural business community too. I think there's a lot more awareness now, perhaps within the general public, in terms of the challenges for rural businesses. I think, speaking from a sort of personal taste perspective, something like Clarkson's farm, whether you like the guy or not, he's raised a huge amount of awareness around the challenges facing the farming community, and actually how much money it costs to run a farm and what you get at the end of it. I think it's been quite eye-opening, and there'll be examples of that, not just in the farming industry, but across all rural sectors. So just having greater awareness, I think, is really important, and for organisations like ours to learn those challenges and be on top of them and understand them. Very different to perhaps the challenges of more urban-based businesses.
So on something like an established brewer or a company of similar sort of history, what kind of advice are you being asked for?
I think, like most businesses, and particularly off the back of COVID, quite often the discussions are based around access to finance. I think a lot of business still are looking at how they can invest in their business and take it to the next level, whether that's introducing new technologies to perhaps make things a bit more efficient. We spoke about the sustainability aspect of businesses. That comes at a cost quite often, and for some small businesses, they don't necessarily have that budget readily available. So quite often it tends to be based around those. But equally, looking at ways in which businesses can innovate and look at new ways of doing things. The introduction of AI, that seems to be the hot topic for a lot of businesses at the moment, how they can use AI and different methods to perhaps sort of shorten processes, things like exporting as well, that maybe that hasn't been tapped into in the past. So there's lots of different areas that we do support businesses with, and in particular rural businesses.
Perhaps over the years, James, I mean, you seem quite happy to ask for help. Maybe rewind the clock. You look at the business in its sort of previous incarnation. Did you ask for help, or is it always the family sort of looked in and as opposed to looking out?
No, I think we've always been very open, and asking for help is a strength in my mind, not a weakness. I like to think I'm, competent and strong at some things, but I probably know those areas after 30 years where I'm not, and I won't be afraid to ask for help. And, I try and encourage that as a culture within the staff all the way through the business. Clearly if someone asks for help for the same thing 3 or 4 times, you have an issue there. But again, you need to reflect on a bit. I think, did I train them properly? And there's a big difference between showing and training, which is something is a bugbear of mine. I showed that person how to do it. Yeah, but did you train them? Because they're 2 completely different things. But absolutely asking for help is a strength.
And the family business thing, does that, again, can that be a hindrance, or is that a strength? How do you view that?
For us, it's certainly been a strength. So during COVID, we didn't charge any of our pubs any rent because they were closed. Now they were in a contractual agreement that said, you owe this rent and you should, look to claim it back from whatever source of government funding there was. But our concern was if when we got through the COVID, I then had 3 dozen sets of keys on my desk, I'd have 3 dozen closed pubs, and that was no good to anybody. So I think when the lockdown was first announced, we took a management decision to cut their rent right down, but the board came back and said no commercial rent. So they only paid a very small rent, which is there for their domestic element of living in the pub. And we knew straight away that that we'd post a thumping great loss because the rental income is important as well as the sales. But the view of the board, and most of the ordinary shareholding sits with the board, was that we've got to do this as a long-term view. And investments go up and down. That little caveat that's on every advertisement on the telly, they go up and down. People only tend to read the up bit. So it was decided that no, we would make sure that I take a long-term view for our business. And consequent no dividend for 2 or 3 years while we recovered. But that was what we decided to do. When times are good, you'll make something from it. When times are tough, you've got to stand up and be counted for the long-term benefit of the business. And say that came from the non-execs.
Who are not necessarily family members?
3 of them are family.
Oh, okay.
One of them is independent, but they're all non-execs, so they're not in the business on a day-to-day. That was their view. We need to do this. We've got to protect these people.
Fascinating. I guess in a family business that's nearly 200 years old, do you feel the weight of history on your shoulders? I mean, you wouldn't want to be the one when they look at all the paintings on the wall that he was the one that messed it up.
Yeah, of course you're looking at that. I've just I've had a beer writer write a book, which I've obviously been closely involved in, and he's written a book, and it's just about ready to go to print. And then I keep checking it. I've had it proofread, and I look at it, and then I find another piece of history or document or something. I think, I should really put this in there, but I can't because I can't put everything in there. But we're so lucky to have this great history, and I've got to try and leave it in better shape than that in which it was. I took it over. Allowing for changing market conditions and everything else. But I hope, I need to leave and have added some value and leave it in the best shape I can.
Rob, just talking about traditional businesses throughout the podcast here, I mean, are they quick to embrace innovation like Hook Norton Brewery has been? Is that your experience?
Yes, I think so. Probably the best example we could cite is our recent Innovation Support for Business programme that closed down last summer, 2023. And we supported over 700 businesses through that programme alone. And I think that generated upwards of 100 new jobs for the county. And specifically that programme addressed businesses looking at innovation and new ways of doing things. So there's definitely a culture for businesses to do things differently, to do things perhaps more efficiently, and ultimately to generate opportunities in the county as well. So the fact that that program, and this is only like a small sample set, there'll be examples of businesses embracing innovation outside of business support programs, but the fact that that supported 100 new jobs for the county, that's 100 new jobs that wouldn't have existed without the support. So I think our experience is, yes, businesses are looking to embrace innovation, however that might.
And the fact that you can tailor that, it is bespoke.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously there are programs that we run that perhaps focus on particular ways of doing things. We mentioned earlier, businesses perhaps experiencing exporting for the first time and understanding that, maybe looking at apprenticeships. That's something that we spoke about prior to the recording, and how they can make a big difference to an organisation, support the growth of their business that way, get people very much bought into the culture of a company. So innovation can be termed in lots of different ways, and I think most businesses are very, very keen to embrace it.
James, how important are organisations like OxLEP in helping to guide businesses in the right direction?
I think it's extremely important that we get professional information from a number of different streams, and this is a very important one of them. There's the sort of peer group talking about things, but then when it comes down to more specifics, I mentioned earlier with our energy project, we had I forget the gentleman's name, which is not very clever of me, went through all of our half-hourly electric data for the best part of a year, so crunched a huge amount of data. And which was bread and butter to him, but it was really useful to us, and then we could get some idea of what our consumption was. So having that practical support as well. But I think it's just it can be quite lonely as well sometimes. I'm quite lucky I've got a reasonable sized team, but it can still be very lonely. And I think it doesn't matter what size your SME is, 10 people, or if you're up to the 250. Having this route of contact. And sometimes it's not just about, I need to know something. Sometimes it's just about, I need to talk about this. And I think, if anything, that's something that we probably need to promote more and more.
That is a good point, actually. A lot of our support that we offer, yes, there's the practical learning new skill side of things, but we run quite a few peer networking groups, and whether that's CEO, MD level, whether that's a specific remit, so the finance directors, getting that group of like-minded individuals together to perhaps discuss common difficulties, common opportunities, actually that is far more valuable than maybe, we spoke about access to finance before, actually for a lot of businesses, just the peer support that's out there from similar sized businesses, or equally, businesses from within different sectors, just looking at how you do things differently. We've had some great feedback on the peer network group. So yeah, that's just equally as important.
Let's bring our conversation to a close, James. Some final thoughts from you. What advice would you offer someone wanting to pursue an independent business idea?
Obviously, do your research as broadly as you can. Get an overarching idea, try and explore, talk to other people, because people are really willing to talk. Even if you think they might be a competitor, you'll find that there'll be lots of people out there with good experience. Make sure you incorporate your work-life balance with that. And don't be, too all-consuming, because at the end of the day, do we live to work or work to live? Well, probably a bit of both. Getting that balance right. But yeah, just talk to people. There's so much information, professional help, experience, whatever you want to call it, out there, and look very broadly at that. Look at organisations, look at other businesses, look at retired people, even talk to other people who have similar ideas as well, and perhaps they want to form their business. So just really do your research, get the balance right, but be brave, take a bit of risk more of your time than your money, but go for it.
Legacy is a big thing, isn't it? I mean, we talked about you don't want to be the one that drops the ball, but you've got kids. You're the great grandson of the founder. Are your children going to follow on?
Fifth generation, and I've got 4 sons. One works in the business in the brew house, been there about 7 years.
Where you started, wasn't it?
Yeah. My youngest son is actually working for Gypsy Hill Brewery in Crystal Palace in London, a very new wave VC-backed business, so very different to us, grain and gate experience. And we mentioned apprenticeships earlier, so I don't know whether he'll listen to this podcast or not, but my son Ed didn't do particularly well with his A-levels. He then did a brewing apprenticeship over lockdown, which had been all face-to-face, straight away went to virtual learning, passed with a distinction. And it's the brewing apprenticeship seems to be a really good qualification because it suits small, medium and large breweries. It's well recognised. He's now, he's at Gypsy Hill, and he's enrolled on his diploma with the Institute of Brewing, which is the sort of next step up. So, fair play. He didn't like school, but then he found something he did like. Yeah. So, yeah, there's some interest and appetite there. But I think all of my boys probably want to see a bit more of the world before they possibly consider.
Yeah.
And, whether they're all involved directly or indirectly, or there's lots of things. So, but we're all very close, so we shall see.
And how will that long-standing legacy of Hook Norton Brewery enable it to continue and grow in years to come? Paint the picture for the next 10 years. What's it going to look like? When your beard's a little greyer, perhaps.
Yeah. I think it'll be more consumer retail focused. We'll have stronger links with our consumers. We'll also have stronger links with our suppliers in terms of, farmers, raw material suppliers and so on. I think the quest for information about your food and the drink and provenance will continue to grow, so we'll need to be satisfying that. There'll probably be a broader range of flavours and styles of drinks, so we'll need to look at that further. But I think essentially we'll still be in the same location, making beer, what styles, how much people are drinking, how much they're allowed to drink, how much the government tells them they can or can't drink, how much AI monitors how much they do actually drink.
Worrying thought.
I don't know, yeah, quite frightening. But I think essentially, I'd like to think there'll still be a brewery there and making a product that people can enjoy. But as I said, it's not just the beer, a business selling a bit of fun.
Huge thanks to James Clarke from Hook Norton Brewery, and a big thank you also to OxLEP's Rob Panting too. And thank you for listening to OxTalks. There are a growing number of editions of OxTalks available from where you normally get your podcasts. Check out some of the previous editions featuring Andrea Stewart from Oxford University Innovation on how to find the right business support for spin-outs and startups. Sarah Powell, HR Director at Le Manoir, on how to create a happy and motivated workforce. And catch Artem Korolev, founder and CEO of Mission Street, on why you should invest in Oxfordshire. Every episode is well worth a listen. Please spread the word, tell your friends or colleagues about us, and if you feel so inclined, leave us a review. You can share your thoughts and suggestions on our social channels, and you can email your questions for inclusion in future editions too. The address is on the podcast description. Business support in Oxfordshire is very close at hand. OxLEP is at your service. The OxLEP business support tool can signpost you to expert help in a matter of minutes. Why not take a look? Find it on our website, oxfordshirelep.com. But for now, from the whole OxLEP team and from me, Howard Bentham, it's goodbye.